For the 8th year in a row, thousands of mothers in Mexico have taken to the streets for a day of remembrance for over 40,000 who remain missing due to violence. Their main demand is that their missing loved ones be found and identified so they can be laid to rest, but they also ask for an end to violence in Mexico. These marches started back in 2011 and have been repeated every Mother's Day since then. Our correspondent in Mexico, Eduardo Martinez, has more.
En México, este 10 de mayo se celebra el Día de la Madre.
While Mexico celebrates Mother's Day on May 10th, thousands of family matriarchs have spent the day marching in cities across the country, demanding that authorities find their children, or sadly, at least their bodies. Some 40,000 people have seemingly disappeared without a trace since 2006. Very few have ever been found. And that's why hundreds of mothers have taken to the streets, claiming that the authorities have not done enough to find the thousands of missing people. These mothers and family members are still waiting for answers, and they say they will not stop until their children are found. And so, mobilizations are taking place here in Mexico City and in 20 other cities around the country.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursdays, only on Telesur.
Thank you for joining us again. The government of Mexico says foreign companies will not be given the chance to build an oil refinery in the southern state of Tabasco. Instead, the work will be led by the state.
Mexico's state oil company Pemex and the Ministry of Energy will take responsibility for building a refinery in the south of the country. It's an emblematic project for the government of Andrés Manuel López Obrador, and he has ruled out tenders from 4 foreign companies.
Estaban pidiendo mucho.
They were asking too much, more than $8 billion, and taking too long. We are not going to begin any project that we can't finish in 6 years.
The president declared the tenders void and called on oil workers and experts to get involved in the project that will create more than 100,000 jobs.
The strategy is to use as much Mexican know-how as possible in the engineering, in manufacturing the equipment, and in skilled labor to maximize the local content.
Since his election campaign, López Obrador has said he wants to reduce fuel imports. Currently, Mexico imports 80% of the gasoline it uses.
The domestic demand in 2018, including gasoline, diesel and jet fuel, was 1,002,000 barrels. While production that year was 360,000 barrels. The difference was covered with imports, which jeopardizes our fuel security.
Work on Mexico's 7th refinery will begin in June and should be finished in May 2022. Private companies may still play a supporting role.
Change is that all this would be contracted for specific jobs. It is this model that's been used in the past for big projects and is common around the world.
Mexico's last new refinery was built 40 years ago. Since then, a series of neoliberal governments have concentrated on drilling for crude and exporting it. They invited foreign private capital to take over part of the industry, which at its peak accounted for 40% of Mexico's income.
Venezuela is reopening its land border with Brazil and its maritime border with the island of Aruba, but not with the other Dutch Caribbean islands. The borders were closed in February when the United States and its allies tried to force so-called humanitarian aid into Venezuela. The announcement was made by the Vice President for the Economy, Tarek El-Aissami.
En el caso de las islas del Caribe,
in the case of the Caribbean island, we have only received a commitment of respect and solidarity and joint work with the authorities of Aruba, but not with the rest of authorities that are part of the Dutch kingdom, like Bonaire and Curaçao.
Venezuela's foreign minister has met the United Nations coordinator in the country to discuss technical assistance to the Venezuelan people. 9 different UN agencies are working with 6 ministries to provide help in areas including health, education, water, and sanitation. Jorge Arreaza and Peter Groman emphasize the importance of this joint work as Venezuela fights to overcome the impact of sanctions and a financial blockade. The Embassy Protection Collective has no intention of leaving Venezuela's embassy in Washington, D.C., even after U.S. authorities cut power supplies to the embassy. Our correspondent, Jorge Gestoso, is outside the embassy, and he spoke with Media Benjamin, the co-founder of international social justice NGO, Code Pink.
It's already more than 24 hours that the electricity has been cut, but to give us an update of what has been going on in the past hours, we're having the co-founder of Code Pink. We're talking about Medea Benjamin. Medea, thanks very much for joining us. What happened in the last few hours?
Well, in the middle of the night, about 3 in the morning, there were 2 people who broke the windows in the basement here and broke inside. And they, one left voluntarily, the other we had to get the Secret Service to escort them out. That's totally illegal break-in entry, and yet neither of them were arrested. And we continue today without electricity, very difficult communication, and yet there is a lot of resistance inside, and we are here outside supporting them, and we will continue to be.
What happened with food and medicines for the activists that are inside?
We're not able to get any food and medicines in, and the pro-Guaido people are blocking us every time we try to do it, physically attacking us every time we do it. And unfortunately, when they physically attack us, they don't get arrested either.
What about your claims to the electricity company, to PEPCO and everyone else in the area to reinstitute the electricity? What they say?
The company says that the State Department told them the owner of this building is Carlos Vecchio, who is the fake ambassador of the fake government of Juan Guaido. And so since he told them to turn off the electricity, that's what they did, and they don't want to comment to any of the news people who call them.
What are the plans for your activist group for this day, for today, Friday, and the weekend?
So tonight we're having a mobilization from 6 to 8 p.m. here. Tomorrow starting at 1 o'clock. And then on Sunday is Mother's Day here in the U.S. We're asking people to come and honor the mothers around the world here.
Are you still going strong for the rest of the days?
Oh, we will be out here every day.
Thanks very much, Medea. We're talking then to Medea Benjamin. She's a co-founder of Code Pink, giving us an update of what's going on here facing the embassy of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela of President Nicolás Maduro. Back to you now.
We thank Jorge Gestoso for that report. A documentary filmmaker was killed in Colombia Thursday night. The police inspector of the Arauquita municipality says several unknown armed people gunned down Mauricio Lezama in a public street. Another person was injured in the attack. Lezama was in the area making a documentary about the victims of violence. In Argentina, at least 6 people have been arrested in connection to Thursday's shooting of a winemaker and public worker. Authorities say the 2 men who shot the worker to death and left the lawmaker in critical condition were among those taken into custody. One of the suspects was caught while trying to flee the country. The other was captured in Uruguay. The motive for the shooting, which happened near Congress in Buenos Aires, is still unclear. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. With about 97% of votes declared, it is now clear that South African voters have given the ruling African National Congress a new mandate to lead the country for the next 5 years. Latest results show that the ANC has won 57.6% of the ballots, while the opposition Democratic Alliance stands at 20.6%, a 2% decline from the 2014 elections. Meanwhile, the Economic Freedom Fighters stands at 10.5%. And the Independent Electoral Commission of South Africa will conduct an audit of the results of Wednesday's elections. Addressing a media conference after meeting with representatives of political parties, Chief Electoral Officer Sai Mamabolo assured that concerns raised by all parties will be addressed during the audit. A group of 35 parties has threatened to launch a legal challenge against the results announced by the Commission.
The Electoral Commission will urgently conduct an audit of results and votes cast in a sample of voting stations to ascertain if double voting occurred. The audit will cover a statistically representative sample of voting stations, as well as where complaints and allegations of double voting have been received.
Our correspondent in Johannesburg, Matuba Malachi, has more.
We are almost at the end of the long election season here in South Africa. That's as the results come in slowly but surely. So far, 70% of the votes have been counted, and the numbers are in, with the African National Congress in the lead in most provinces, and 8 provinces to be precise, and 1 province going to the official opposition Democratic Alliance. And there will be a battle for the economic hub. That's the Gauteng province, where the ANC needs more than 50%, and as 70% votes have been counted so far, it stands at around in the early 50s. So that is going to be a closely watched battle between the 3 parties, and the ANC may have to form a coalition government to actually govern that province. Now, another hurdle for the Independent Electoral Commission is the smaller parties, who on Thursday voiced concern and actually a sign of protest against the IEC, saying that these elections were not free and fair. That's after the Independent Electoral Commission released a statement that it would conduct an audit on alleged misconduct and alleged double voting in some areas, in some provinces, but they're yet to appoint the audit firm that will conduct this this audit to ensure that the integrity of these elections have not been compromised. So we know also that this audit will not affect the numbers that are coming in, because the IEC says these numbers are clean and have been audited and verified. So that will not be, the audit will not affect the incoming results as we speak. And the IEC had planned to announce the results by Saturday evening. So we don't know if this will continue as planned, because the smaller parties say they are willing to even go to court to interdict the IEC from releasing the current results, because they feel aggrieved. They feel that these results do not reflect the will of the people. But the South African political landscape in the past few days has been so unpredictable. Even some of the political parties that did well were not expected to do so, because traditionally they would not be doing as well as they do, and those are some of the smaller parties. But now we keep you updated on the developing story that is the South African election. That's back to you, studio.
We thank Matuba for that important report. At least 50 people have died in Tunisia after a boat capsized off the coast of Kirkana. 16 people have been rescued by fishing boats. The number of victims is expected to rise, as the recovery of bodies by the Tunisian Navy is still ongoing. The victims, who are of sub-Saharan origin, had sailed off from Libya. Hundreds of protesters in Nigeria have demanded an end to police impunity in the country. The police have been accused of carrying out a string of sexual assaults. Last month, several women were dragged out of nightclubs, hotels, and bars in a police raid and arrested for prostitution. The women have denied the charges. During the protests, women were heard chanting, "Being a woman is not a crime," and "My body, my life."
I've not heard anything from the police, and we need to add, because we are citizens of this country. We need to know why it's being done. If they don't want the clubs to be working, they should let us know. You cannot go to the club and arrest people and charge them for loitering. How can you be loitering in a club?
Misrata-based armed groups are heading to the Libyan capital, Tripoli, to join fighters loyal to the UN-backed government to fend off an attack by General Khalifa Haftar's forces. Haftar's so-called Libyan National Army, or LNA, which is allied to a rival administration in eastern Libya, mounted an offensive on Tripoli in April. They claim that the UN-backed government is controlled by terrorists. The fighting has killed hundreds of people and displaced thousands. Almost 900 children held by a government-backed anti-Boko Haram militia in Nigeria have been released. According to UNICEF, the children, who include 106 girls, had been serving in the ranks of the Civilian Joint Task Force, which provides support to the Nigerian armed forces battling Boko Haram fighters. The task force was formed in 2013 to protect communities from these attacks, but it has been criticized for recruiting children into its ranks.
Today, 894 children, including 106 girls, were released from the ranks of an armed group called Civilian Joint Task Force in Maiduguri, northeast Nigeria, as part of this group's commitment to end and prevent the recruitment and use of children.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, activists are holding protests against mobile phone operators. The citizen movement La Lucha are demanding lower data and calls prices and an improvement of service. About 15 protesters were arrested in Goma in the east of the country, while in Kinshasa, activists demonstrated peacefully in front of the headquarters of Orange, one of the country's main operators. Following the devastating cyclones that hit Africa in the past months, the team from Telesur has traveled to Mozambique to report on the reconstruction efforts. Our correspondent, Andre Veira, is there.
We are reporting from Mozambique, a country that was directly affected by two recent cyclones. We are at the Shibabava district in the center of the country, which was affected by the first cyclone, a natural disaster. The second one hit farther north. In the next days, we will be here from the African continent, spreading the voice of its people who have suffered from this cyclone and are now rebuilding its country. There's been signs of international solidarity, mainly popular social organizations and communal, who are helping rebuild this country.
We thank Andre Veira for that report. A 5-year, multi-million-dollar water improvement project has been launched in Barbados to ease chronic water woes. The $45 million initiative is being implemented by the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center and the Green Climate Fund. The project is the fund's first single-country investment in the Caribbean. Once complete, it should improve access to potable water and increase Barbados' resilience to extreme climate events. Trinidad and Tobago's government is denying accusations of discrimination and inequalities in water distribution by its state-owned water authority, WASA. Residents of rural districts in the south have complained of having no water in their taps for more than 50 days. And part of the problem are long delays in repairs to pipelines in certain communities.
There's also been a lot of conversations about discrimination and where water is going and so forth. Again, that is not so. I want to say that the amount of water that WASA has plans and that they have been dealing with this situation. At present, about 88 million gallons of water per day is sent to South Trinidad, and around 89 million gallons of water a day is sent to North Trinidad. And we do, because of our aging infrastructure, we have been dealing with the challenges and the lack of focus that has been placed in certain areas when we had money vis-a-vis storage. Our storage capacity in Trinidad and Tobago is very low.
Antigua's government has expressed doubt about whether a reduction in the cost of regional air travel is achievable. Inter-island airfares have skyrocketed in the last 2 decades, but the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff says he believes the charges are somewhat justifiable as regional governments have invested in airport infrastructure and security, especially since 9/11. And it's unlikely government will be willing to reduce operation costs. Meanwhile, the cabinet has discussed reducing landing fees and some of the taxes Antigua-based airline Liat pays in order to keep the regional career afloat. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. The final day of trade talks between China and the United States ended with the U.S. increasing tariffs on Chinese products. The U.S. has raised tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese imports. China says it deeply regrets the move and will take necessary countermeasures. Venezuela will likely be put up for discussion when Russian President Vladimir Putin and U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo meet in Russia next week. It's one of the issues the U.S. and Russia have clashed over, with Pompeo having led Washington's call for Russia to stop backing Venezuela's legitimate president Nicolás Maduro. This is perhaps the most significant interaction between the two countries since last July, when U.S. President Donald Trump met President Putin in Finland. The former U.S. intelligence analyst and whistleblower Chelsea Manning was released from prison on Thursday night. This after she was detained for 62 days in connection with the WikiLeaks investigation. Manning was released as the period during which she could be held expired. She was arrested in March for failing to answer more questions about WikiLeaks. However, she says she already testified in 2013 when she was found guilty of espionage for leaking secret military files to the website.
A basis and a grounds on which to oppose.
With tensions high after Israel's latest attacks on the Gaza Strip, the government in Tel Aviv has extended the area in which Palestinian boats are allowed to fish. Our correspondent Nayara Tardo explains.
This morning at 10 a.m. local time, the Israeli government extended the permitted fishing zone in Gaza to 12 nautical miles. Last week, Tel Aviv had reduced the zone to 6 nautical miles and also destroyed Palestinian fishing nets, which increased tension. We should remember that the fishing areas agreed between Israel and the PLO in 1994 was 20 miles, but Israel reduced that to 12 miles in 2006, and later to 6 and even 3 nautical miles. This has caused a lot of tension, and every Monday the Palestinians hold a march in protest at the Israeli blockade of the Gaza Strip, both by land and by sea. This has caused great hardship because the Palestinians in Gaza depend heavily on this fishing. This Friday, Palestinians are holding the 158th edition of the Great March of Return, both in Gaza and in the rest of the occupied territories. Last week, this march ended in heavy repression by the Israeli armed forces, leaving 4 protesters dead. And that was followed by Israeli airstrikes throughout the weekend that killed 27 Palestinians and wounded about 100. There was then a ceasefire, but that remains fragile, and Israel still has not officially confirmed it.
We thank Nayara Tardo for that report. The United Nations Refugee Agency says a record 41.3 million people were uprooted within their own countries last year due to conflicts and violence. 2/3 were displaced in just 10 countries, including Syria, Colombia, and Somalia. Unlike refugees or asylum seekers, internally displaced people cannot claim international protection and often have less access to aid and medical care.
Well, with more than 41 million internally displaced and more than 28 million refugees in the world, I fear that we will continue to see the trend upwards before it will go downwards, because world leaders are not sitting down and say, let us at least agree on one thing. shield the civilian population, avoid new conflicts like the ones we're seeing now in Libya, the escalation we've seen in Yemen again, the new conflict in Cameroon that we're doing nothing about.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.